Nearly 70 years ago, one of the largest experiments in human history began. It involved millions of people with similar backgrounds, history, and beliefs. They spoke the same language, ate the same foods, dressed the same way, listened to the same music, and worshipped at the same temples. And just 7 decades later, they couldn't be more different. So what and where was this experiment? The Korean Peninsula. Following the Korean War, the country split into 2 nations. North Korea's economy is one of the least free in the world. Virtually all economic decisions, investment, and production is controlled by the central government in Pyongyang. And this centrally planned economy works off of 5-year plans. Now you may be asking, what's wrong with a 5-year plan? After all, we're talking about a country with a world leader who has golfed a perfect game and perfected driving at the age of 3. Well, it turns out that no matter how many flattering stories your state-controlled media prints about you, planning millions of economic transactions for millions of people is a little bit harder than it looks. Despite having more resources, ports, and 50 times the population, its economy is smaller than Wyoming, and many times smaller than South Korea. But how is that possible when not a single leader in South Korea has ever shot 18 straight holes in one? Well, despite this deficiency, starting in 1965, South Korea didn't outsource all its economic decisions to the central government, and it grew larger than North Korea for the first time in history. Within a decade, this economic growth would allow the South to eclipse its northern rival. Throughout the 70s and 80s, South Korea's economy left the North in the dust, and today, the South boasts a GDP of over 1.6 trillion, and that is 64 times larger than the North. In fact, the gap between the South and the North is so large that it can be viewed from space, literally. At night, the South is awash with light, but north of the DMZ, there's only a small pale light emanating from Pyongyang. The rest of North Korea is shrouded in darkness. But it's not just economic size where South Korea is pulled ahead. Consider these facts. North Korea's life expectancy is 10 years lower than the South's. North Korea has half of the population. North Korea's infant mortality rate is 6 times higher than the South. And the malnutrition in North Korea is so bad that most of its people are several inches shorter than their southern counterparts. Perhaps the only area where North Korea leads the world in what could be considered a positive category is this one. That's right, unicorn layers. So how in just a few generations could the gap between these two countries be this large? And you will be surprised to discover that the answer is not simply political freedom, although that is a significant factor. In addition to that, it's economic freedom. South Korea is 64 times richer than the North, not simply because they have the right to vote for their political leaders, but because they have the right to own property, start a business, run that business with very little fear of dear leader imprisoning them for spelling his name wrong. Yeah, that actually happened. So while no one on the Korean Peninsula signed up for this ideological experiment, and certainly we do not blame the North Korean population for what its government continues to perpetuate against them, it cannot be denied that the results are astounding, and the conclusion is that economic and political freedom are key to prosperity and flourishing, no matter where you go in the world.